a 2012 Republican presidential hopeful and a one-time member of the Obama diplomatic team, is pushing what he calls the politics of problem solving. Does he really believe Washington can stop fighting and start fixing? Former Governor Jon Huntsman coming up on the next Politicking with Larry King. Welcome to Politicking. I'm Larry King, and joining me here in New York is a man who has worn many hats, and from both sides of the aisle. Former governor of Utah, former United States ambassador to China, a candidate for the 2012 Republican presidential nomination, chairman of the board of directors at the Atlantic Council, and is now the co-chairman of No Labels, which is determined to stop the fighting and start the fixing in politics. He's one of my favorite people, too. He's Governor Jon Huntsman. Welcome to Politicking.
Larry, what a treat. Being with the King, life doesn't get much better than this. But I have to tell you this, I also have a radio program now. On Sirius XM.
I'm going to guess.
Yes, you're going to be on.
Next Saturday, you're calling.
And guess where I fell in love with radio?
Where?
Listening to you on the Mutual Radio
Late
Network.
at night.
I used to stay up. Mary Kay and I were just married. I'd worked for Ronald Reagan as an advance man, and I'd stay up late at night to listen to you. You had the best guests on, and you would really dig deep on really substantive issues of the day.
Your father worked in the Nixon White House.
He sure did.
The famed Huntsmans.
Sure
like to be called, I know I asked this of Adlai Stevenson, what he preferred, governor or ambassador. He always wanted to be governor. What do you like?
You know, Averell Harriman, who was the governor of this great state and our ambassador to the Soviet Union during the Cold War, was asked that question. He said, you know, I like governor because that was given to me by the people. And I think that kind of resonates with me. Being governor is the best job in the world. There's nowhere to hide. There's no way to obfuscate. You're out there on point. You've got to present a vision to your people and get it done. And if you don't, you're over.
I want to talk about No Labels in a while, but first some current things. How do you think the president is handling the Ukrainian thing?
Well, we're out of a whole lot of good options. And so what do? You work on sanctions, and then you tighten the sanctions. What we're waking up to, and I think where he has found himself to be deficient, is we've pivoted away from Europe as a traditional set of alliances. We've pivoted to Asia. We're focused on getting our domestic house in order. We used to do this thing called alliance maintenance during the Cold War. We'd train, we'd have war exercises, we would sell advanced equipment, we'd train militaries together, we'd exchange intelligence. We just have gotten out of that business with Europe, and now we see that maybe we have a huge deficiency there, and he's going to have to fix that.
Critics, many in the Republican and a lot of conservatives, call him weak and feckless. Now, you were his ambassador to China. Would you call him weak?
Well, I would say that he's not using all the tools of the presidency. He's not using the bully pulpit. I think he could use that a whole lot more effectively. In using this as a teaching example of why it's a dangerous world and why the United States and our leadership matters, and why engaging in strong economic relationships abroad is probably the only way we're really going to strengthen the international alliance system in ways that really do matter.
Did he, when you worked with him, was he on top of things? Did you keep in constant touch as ambassador, or did you work with the Secretary of State?
Secretary of State, I worked with, Director of the CIA, Secretary of Defense. I found him to be a very thoughtful student, smart, on top of things. So I went to China my first time with Ronald Reagan when I worked for him in the early 80s. It was his first trip.
We should understand that on your Mormon mission, you went to China. And
I had lived in Taiwan a couple of times.
So you speak Chinese.
I speak Chinese. And Ronald Reagan went over there, his first trip to China, met Deng Xiaoping. The two of them came together in the Great Hall of the Peoples. It was in 1984. The two most charismatic people I've ever been around. Deng Xiaoping, 4'11", this firebrand from Sichuan, and Ronald Reagan, this elegant movie star from the United States. And they sat down in their seats, and Deng Xiaoping lit a cigarette, spit into a spittoon a couple of times, and said, let's figure out how to change the world. And they talked to each other really without notes or script, just as friends and politicians. And I fast-forwarded history to when President Obama went to China, and I was then ambassador there as well. Much different style, cool, studious. clinical. Sat down with Hu Jintao, who was then the head of state. They pull out the talking points. We read ours, they read theirs, we read ours. You could have seen the ice forming on the table. But it's really the way that the U.S.-China relationship is managed these days. It's so large and it's so complicated that everything is scripted and everything is rehearsed and pre-rehearsed, and you don't have a lot of spontaneity.
What makes a good ambassador?
A good ambassador, A, understands the country to which he or she is posted. B, is a good manager, because at the end of the day, an embassy, the one in China is the second largest in the world. You've got 2,000 people in every department and agency imaginable. You've got to make it work. And 3, you have a good sense of your own country. You understand the cultural aspects, the historical aspects, political aspects of the United States of America, such that you can explain your way through difficult circumstances in your host country.
As the former Chinese ambassador to China, what does the governor think of U.S.-China relations under President Obama? Don't go away. I know how you must have felt terrible for our ambassador who was killed in Benghazi.
Ambassador Stevens, yeah.
Is Benghazi a credible issue?
Well, I have to tell you, I have a bit of a conflict here, because I know what ambassadors do. They are responsible for the security of their mission, and our ambassador to Libya would have been responsible for approving the security arrangements at the newly stood up consulate in Benghazi.
And that ambassador answered to Clinton?
It would have gone through the Assistant Secretary of State for Diplomatic Security and ultimately the Secretary of State. There's no question about that. And here's what happens, because we stood up a new consulate too in China, and I know how long it takes to get security. So his threat would have been a terror threat. Ours was a counterintelligence threat in China, which is the most significant in the world. And in each case, you need different kinds of security fortification. But you ask the State Department, the answer typically is, we're doing all we can in Afghanistan and Iraq. The resources are threadbare. We don't have much we can do. We're going to have to put you in the queue. And they then go prioritizing those destinations that are more in need than others. And I suspect that's what he did. And I'm guessing they were waiting. So they had local security, the first perimeter. They had State Department security, the second perimeter. They didn't have the Marines yet. And Marines typically aren't deployed until it becomes a classified mission. So the CIA annex down the road from the consulate in Benghazi would have had a special kind of security arrangement.
Is it a fair issue?
I think it will be used, whether I think it's fair or not. I think it's a horrible case of miscommunication by the White House. They should have come out early and spoken for it. Is it a really deep and substantive issue that really kind of points its finger at really malicious behavior on the part of some public servants? I don't think so.
Do ambassadors know that, in a sense, when they take that role, they risk their lives?
Well, they train you, and most are steeped in some history of diplomatic service, and you're trained about internal issues, what goes on in the embassy, and external issues, and the threat profile. And everybody knows when you go out to post exactly what your threat profile is. And listen, it can be a dangerous business. You know, going with the American flag on your car wherever you go, everyone knows that you're the key representative of the United States. In some places, it can get a little dicey.
All right, Governor, what is No Labels?
No Labels is a political movement comprised of Republicans, Democrats, and everything in between that has the goal of changing the operating environment of Washington, taking it from anger and finger pointing and acrimony toward problem solving. Now, here we are, the most technically advanced nation on earth. We put a man on the moon, we crack the code on the Genome Project, we innovate the next generation of industries, and we have a retrograde political system. I mean, how can it be that in one country you have Silicon Valley on one end and you've got Washington, D.C. on the other? That is a complete example of dysfunction. We haven't had mechanical failure. We have a constitution. We have institutions of power. We've had human failure. And the only way you're going to deal with human failure is by hitting it on a human level.
Did you form it?
No, I was recruited after it was formed by a guy named Joe Manchin, the great senator from West Virginia. We were elected governors together. Democrat. They wanted a Democrat and a Republican. Joe and I were elected governors together 10 years ago. And we became best friends, Republican, because we'd swap ideas about tax reform, education reform, how to get things done, how to improve your state. And we were both amazed at how much you can do as a governor. I mean, you can strike out, set the agenda, articulate a vision, and then lead out, and people will follow.
What caused this cleavage? When I was young, I remember that Republicans and Democrats would put their arms around each other, solve problems. To work in accommodation was considered a grave. Henry Clay, the great compromise.
Sure.
Where did it go wrong?
We've had professional obstructionism that has grown up in our political system. So you now have on K Street in Washington, D.C., full-time professionals who are consultants, who are spin artists, who are communicators, who are script writers, and they work for Team Red or Team Blue. They work for the Republicans, they work for the Democrats. And we've completely disincentivized any work in the middle, which is to say getting things done and compromising. So if you want to raise money, Larry, if you want to get on the talk shows, you got to be at the extreme end. That's where the action is. And so we've created this impenetrable barrier between both sides, and no one can seem to cross it today.
How do people join No Labels? How do people get involved?
Well, nolabels.org is a very good place to go.
Go to nolabels.org.
Go to nolabels.org, and you will find two things that we are doing that is most unprecedented. And we were here today with 10 of our members of Congress, 5 Republicans, 5 Democrats, who have said, I've had enough. I don't want to be associated with an institution that has an 8% approval rating. I want to be associated with people getting something done. So we have built over the last year a problem solvers caucus on Capitol Hill, half Republicans, half Democrats, numbering 94 people. This has never been done before. The Tea Party caucus is maybe 60. We're now at 94. They meet regularly, they're building trust, and they're beginning to put legislation through, like no budget, no pay.
They will take a stand on issues?
That's what they're beginning to do now. You have to start somewhere, and we started with convening people. You have to at least sit in the same room and get to know one another and build trust. And that's how it started. And now we're embarking upon phase 2, which is a national strategic agenda. So this country doesn't have a strategy going forward. I've lived in 4 countries during my lifetime. All but one has a strategic agenda. They know where they're going. They know what the ratios to hit are financially. They know where they want to be educationally. They know where they want to be from an economic development standpoint. We don't. We kind of hope it all kind of moves forward productively.
Are you still a Republican?
Of course. I'm a Teddy Roosevelt Republican, Abraham Lincoln Republican.
But you said in December of 2012, you said the Republican Party was devoid of a soul.
Well, I don't take those words back at all.
So you're a member of an organization that's devoid of a soul.
Well, I remember when the Democrats back in the 80s had a really tough time, and it could have been argued that they didn't have a soul.
So what do you try to do, change the soul?
Well, a person, a leader, will infuse the party with a soul. We don't have a leader right now in the party. It is leaderless. So it raises money where it can. It tries to influence the debate where it can. But if you look at party leadership compared to the days that you talked about, where we had really great leaders in the Republican Party, people knew them, they were statespeople, they could move the market. Can anybody name the heads of the party today? Mm-hmm. They can't. And that's where we are. They're much diminished in the political marketplace.
NoLabels.org. Will this former presidential candidate consider another run in 2016? We'll try to find out next. The organization is NoLabels.org, right?
That's it, NoLabels.org.
NoLabels.org. You should go to that and find out a lot more about this very important organization. I think I'm going to join.
Love to have you, Larry.
I will join.
Love
Why
to
not?
have you.
There's enough of this split.
You will show up on Capitol Hill and see the most amazing coming together of Republicans and Democrats around a national strategic agenda, the issues that really matter in this country.
Are you concerned about the Tea Party?
Well, the Tea Party is an amalgamation of groups that have kind of lost some momentum But what I find troubling about the whole Tea Party movement are the people who have taken advantage of the Tea Party movement, the Club for Growth, the Heritage Foundation and their political arm. Yeah, these are the quintessential Washington insiders who parade as grassroots rebels. And they're the strategists, they're the consultants who are making a whole lot of money off this phase of crazy politics. And in the process, they're making the Republican Party virtually unelectable at the presidential level. So how do you find candidates who can get 40% of the vote instead of 15% of the vote? That's where the party's having a tough time these days.
So many people told me I would have voted for Jon Huntsman, but he couldn't get the nomination because the party is too split. Would you run again?
Well, we ran once, obviously, and you've got to be a little bit crazy to do that. And for our family,
Are you a little bit crazy?
Well, I think to run for office generally, which is to say you throw your name out there, you open yourself up, you've got to be willing to embrace risk, because a political campaign is all about risk. It's like an entrepreneur rolling the dice with capital. You know, you've got a little bit of, all you have is a name at the end of the day, and you're putting that out for all to chew on and analyze, and you're asking the most humbling question I've ever asked anybody. Will you vote for me? That's a tough thing to do if you've never done that before, to ask somebody for the vote.
You did it as governor.
I did, re-elected as governor. You stand on a soapbox, and the only thing that a voter has to give is that thing called trust. And
So
they
you
want to know
will do it again.
Well,
You're thinking about it.
I'm a public servant, Larry, and as a public servant, I've found that politics is a lot about serendipity. You know, it's hard to be able to pre-plan where you might find yourself as a public servant. I never thought I'd run for governor. I never thought I'd be in China as the United States ambassador. Things happen.
So you're open.
I'm open, but here's the deal. You have to be able to create a pathway from point A to point B. I can tell you how I'd get to the finish line from Super Tuesday, but I can't tell you how I get through those early primary states, having been there and done that once
What
before.
does the family think?
The family loved it. They had a terrific
They
experience.
would support if you did it again?
They would be totally supportive. Now, I have two boys in the military. One is graduating from the U.S. Naval Academy next week, and he'll be a naval aviator. He goes to Pensacola Naval Air Station in August. And another son at the Naval Academy who's a tough guy, and he'll do his thing. And they're completely uninterested in politics, as they should be. But they're a guidepost of sorts for me, because I say the world that we're now bequeathing to this next generation and the wars that these guys and gals will be commissioned to fight, they're going to have to be thought through by people who have a sense of passion, a knowledge of the world, an understanding of what America's interests are. We've been through some really tough years of war in this nation. And every time I look at those boys, I think all the families who have gone before us and committed their sons and daughters, it's been a tough few years, and the years ahead aren't going to be easy either. But I can't break that bond I have with my sons and what they're going to be doing in a future in politics.
What about those feisty daughters? The stand-up Huntsman kids.
Hey, you know, the political advisors said during the campaign, keep the girls away. You know, they're going to get you in a lot of trouble. And of course, the girls were saying, that's exactly the point. We want to get you into trouble because you're not getting yourself into enough trouble. We have to explain who our dad is to
Well, may I say, I hope you think about running. I'm glad you are thinking. At least you're open.
Well, you never close out options in politics. We are not organizing. We're not raising money. I've come to this conclusion as well, Larry, having been inside politics and now outside. I think you can have even more of an impact in changing the marketplace outside than you can inside.
I'm talking to former Governor Jon Huntsman. More after this. Give me some thoughts on some possible candidates. What do you think of Rand Paul of Kentucky?
Well, he's an interesting model. I don't know that the American public is going to go for a senator who served for only 18 days, like we did this last go around. I think they're going to want some seasoning. That aside, I think he's really trying hard to create a new narrative for the party and to build bridges to lost demographics. I think he understands the part about politics as being basic math. If you don't have enough in the way of numbers to show up and vote for you at the end of the day, you may as well hang it up. And right now, the Republicans have burned bridges to too many demographics.
If your party doesn't come forward on immigration and women, you can't win. You'll win congressionally. You can't win a national election.
That's right. And so we'll all jump for joy, when we do well in the midterm election. But they're tailor-made for a Republican victory. It's off-cycle for the president. You get a low turnout. You get the activists generally who promote the turnout. But that isn't a measure of progress toward winning the presidency, which is where real change can be made.
What do you think of Paul Ryan?
I think Paul's a brilliant guy. I really do. I don't think he'll run for higher office. I think he'll get out there on the stump and talk about the issues. But I think he's a very refreshing and talented policy wonk.
Chris Christie, can he overcome the bridge debacle?
Of course.
He can.
Because people love a second chance in politics. They really do. And sometimes when people come back the second time, they're even better and stronger than the first time.
Someone who might be very close to you in many opinions, I would gather, would be Jeb Bush. Mm-hmm. What do you like him?
I like Jeb a lot. And his son, Jeb Jr., was our organizer for youth during the campaign. And I know Jeb's family. His dad, President Bush, was one who we went to see as we were beginning the campaign. And he said, of all the jobs I've had, ambassador to China was the best. And all he wanted to do for our 3-hour lunch was talk about the days in China. But Jeb, I know exactly the deliberations he's having at home. And I know the pressure that's being put on him right now
by his mother.
Well, you have to sit down with your family and you have to anticipate what will happen as you begin to game out the scenario. And it isn't always pleasant. He's been there at a very high level. And I know exactly the conversations he's having.
Ted Cruz.
Ted is, so I got to know Ted's wife when she worked in the trade office under the George W. Bush administration, Heidi Cruz, who now is with Goldman Sachs. So Ted is an interesting example of Princeton and Harvard and a lot of the great institutions of the American establishment who's been able to morph
break away from that mold
into a grassroots firebrand. And I think there's something brilliant about what he's trying to do, which is to say, I think my strategy will be the reverse Romney. I'll go out, capture the grassroots. I can get the Harvard guys later because they're going to be there anyway.
Rubio.
Don't know him.
And Scott Walker of Wisconsin. You know Governor Walker?
Yes. In fact, I'll be the graduation speaker at University of Wisconsin in 2 weeks, and I'll see him while I'm there. Good governor, innovative, controversial, fresh face. And I think because of that, he'll be in the mix.
All right, you worked for her. What do you make of Hillary Clinton?
Well, at the risk of totally destroying my future in politics, I have to say she's a very impressive public servant. You know, as a young Republican, you're trained to go after the Clintons, and Hillary Clinton, of course, was the nemesis during the Clinton years. And then you have an opportunity to work with her as Secretary of State. And I have to say, I haven't been around too many people as professional, as well briefed, as good with people at all levels of life, whether a head of state or the person holding open the door. I think that's the measure of a leader, someone who is gracious and kind to all people. I found her to be a good listener, too. All attributes of somebody who is, we might not agree on all the issues, but I have to say, she's a very, very capable person.
She'll be formidable, right?
Oh, of course, of course.
Time magazine recently named the Chinese president as one of the world's most influential leaders. You called him the most transformational Chinese leader since Deng Xiaoping, right?
Yes.
Oh, I pronounced that wrong.
Yeah, for Deng Xiaoping. And so Deng
How was he transformational?
Well, so Deng was transformational in that he took a China in chaos after Mao's death in 1976 and the Cultural Revolution and opened the doors economically and diplomatically. And China has kind of been on that same glide slope ever since the late 70s. And it's built up a lot of barnacles, corruption, inefficiencies, the middle income trap, all these issues that they have to now deal with. And along comes this 61-year-old politico, son of Xi Jinping, who was a deputy prime minister under Mao, sent to prison, as was his mother. And this guy, Xi Jinping, was railroaded out during the Cultural Revolution. He's seen China at its worst and at its most tumultuous. He knows where he wants to take the country. He doesn't want to return to those days. And he knows he's got some hard choices to make in order to break down the special interest barriers and the widespread corruption that really have created a sense of real distrust among the Chinese people.
Is it unstable there now?
Well, it's hard to measure China as 1.3 billion people because it's so big and vast, and a lot of things can happen that really would lead us to believe that they're unstable. But they grow at 7.5% each year. The employment number is relatively good. Their trust in government and trust in the party is diminishing. And that is why Xi Jinping is breaking down the old economic model, creating a new one, which is a very risky thing to be doing. He knows that they're out of economic life as an exporter. They just can't keep exporting their way to prosperity. They have to expand industry domestically. They have to consume more. But he also knows that he's got some hardline elements, among them the People's Liberation Army, the military in China, that he's got to win over. And that tough talk toward Japan and the East China Sea islands, a lot of that is really geared toward winning over the hardline elements in his country. So he's consolidating his base, and he's been doing that for a year and a half very effectively, and he'll be around for 10 years.
What about the Chinese people don't we know? What are they like?
I have a Chinese daughter that I'm raising, so I wake up to China every day. She's 14 years old. We adopted her from an orphanage. She was abandoned at 2 months of age, and I've been trying to think through this very question for a lot of years, 35 years as a matter of fact. And the Chinese people are gracious and proud and steeped in history, 5,000 years worth. We look at them as maybe a communist nation. I look at them more as a Confucius people. They're more impacted, influenced by Confucius values than anything else, that sense of hierarchy, that sense of respect, that filial piety. That's what makes China, China. And then you layer over that the tumultuous 20th century that they went through, incursions, upheavals, invasions, takeovers, great leap forward, cultural revolution, and the Chinese people have been through an enormous amount. They're proud now of where they are. They're united as a country. They're under one flag. They don't have any foreign invaders, and they feel like they're on top of the world right now.
And I'll be a guest on your radio show next week, and it's an honor having you with us.
Larry, what a treat.
I want to thank Governor Jon Huntsman for joining us today on Politicking. For my viewers out there, I want to hear from you. Join the conversation on my Facebook page. Share your thoughts on Twitter by tweeting at King's Things and using the Politicking hashtag. That's all for this week's Politicking.